Hello. Today, I will be discussing with you the structure of an economic system. When one talks about structure, one refers generally to the non-visible elements that characterize a social system. In an economic system, there are many visible elements, like the Philippines is a developing country, France is a developed country, yet in both countries there are airports, there are universities, there's a government, there are expressways, there are railway systems, there are medical institutions and the like, and these are all visible. However, what would differentiate a developed from a developing country would be what is called the structure of the economic system. This is based upon structural theories of economics, so that one can, therefore, identify a developed country by the structure of its economic system, so that if a country does not have that structure, then it would be classified a developing economy. One can then try and understand how, over time, the developing economy became a developed country. So now let us look at this slide presentation here. Okay. Here, when we look at the structure of an economic system, okay, here one can see the main elements and the main factors that characterize a fully developed economy. It's also called a fully modern economic system. It's also the structure of a developed economy. Okay? Now, in this stylized representation of the structure of an economic system, it identifies just a few crucial groups and how they interact with each other and how this interaction then characterizes the economy. Okay? Let's first look at the basic ones here, which are the wage households and the business firms. Households earn what would be called incomes, okay, or factor incomes, meaning to say incomes for the sale of factors of production. That's why you can see there the line that says factor services and the line that says factor payments. Factor services would be labor, capital, and land. So the factor payments are payments for the use of these factors of production, and the factor payments become factor incomes for the households. So when they provide labor, they earn a wage. When they provide some physical capital, such as machinery and equipment, they get a share in profits. When they provide land, they earn rent. Okay? So the sale of these factor services by households allow them to earn incomes or factor incomes. With these incomes, then they're able to purchase consumer goods. Okay? There are many reasons why they purchase consumer goods, but the general theory here is that the purchase of consumer goods contribute to their general level of satisfaction. There are many things that allow people to attain happiness or satisfaction in life. From an economic system, this attainment can be manifested in the purchase of goods and services. A lot of things, of course, cannot be purchased, but insofar as an economic system is concerned, it focuses on the goods and services that households purchase. The purchase of these consumer goods, okay, are are paid for by cash, which is then what is called consumption expenditure. Okay? The consumption expenditure, households are able to spend these because they're able to earn factor incomes. Now, let's look at the side of business firms. Business firms are profit maximizing entities. That is the assumption in economic analysis. For whatever reasons firms may have, they still have to earn a profit for them to survive and even thrive. Business firms are able to produce profit first by producing and selling goods and services which are sold to households. Okay? And the consumption expenditure of households become revenues to the business firms. In order for business firms to produce the goods and services, it buys factor services from households, labor, capital, and land, and pays for this through factor payments, which are factor incomes to households. So wages for labor, sharing the profit for capital, and rent for those that provide land. Okay? So in this means you have the households and firms. They therefore form the basic units in what is called the circular flow of money, income, and product. The circular flow of product would involve the movement of goods from the business firms to households and the factor services from households to business firms. The circular flow of income would be the factor payments made by business firms, which become factor incomes to households, and the expenditure by households, which become revenue for business firms. And the circular flow of money would be the factor payments and consumption expenditure. They both manifest themselves in the form of money. So a basic nature of the economic system is that you have what is called a circular flow of money, income, and product. And what makes economic activity attain higher and higher levels is the speed of the circular flow. The faster the circular flow, then the greater the level of economic activity, which then gets to be measured as gross national income or gross national product. Okay. So whenever you have households that keep on purchasing goods and services, business firms realize that there's a great demand for goods and services, so they begin to invest in expansion. And one of the things that happen here is that they would end up hiring more people, more laborers, which provides more income for households. And households then keep on spending more, which means that more business firms begin to notice this increase in consumption expenditure, and they therefore invest further in the production of and sale of goods and services. And in doing that, they therefore hire more laborers, obtain more capital, more land. So you have this circular flow moving on and on and on, which therefore explains higher and higher levels of economic activity. Okay. That is why in the pandemic of 2020, it is not surprising that the economies throughout the world went on recession because households had to remain inside their homes, and they ended up reducing their consumption expenditure mainly to food and other necessities. So a lot of business firms ended up closing shop and therefore laying off workers, and a lot of workers therefore lost incomes. When households are simply purchasing food and beverage and essential items like medicines and the like, the bulk of business production therefore ends up stopping because the bulk of business revenue comes from the sale, the production and sale of cars, household furnishings, home appliances, electronic gadgets, and the like. Food, beverage, medicines comprise only a very, very small portion. And this is the case where the circular flow completely slowed down. So therefore, to increase economic activity, the circular flow has to be made to move faster and faster. Now, let's look at financial institutions. There'd be households and firms who might have some surplus cash, which they might not need. So they would deposit it in financial institutions, in which case their savings there earns them another form of income, which is interest earnings. Interest being the general term for any earnings to one's financial assets. Okay? Now, what do financial institutions do with these earnings? Financial institutions are also profit-oriented establishments. Okay? The deposits that they receive are a form of a cost, but with these deposits, they are then able to provide for credit to households and firms who might need to make expenditures but do not have the necessary cash as of that moment. Then they could then borrow from financial institutions. Of course, they would pay interest on that, but then the interest payment can be serviced to the future earnings of households and firms. The interest on credit less the interest on deposits is what is called the interest rate spread, which is the main source of revenue for financial institutions. Now, what is the effect of the financial institutions able to provide credit and other forms of financial assets? Whenever households or firms borrow, okay, they need to do so because they need to make an expenditure right now, but they don't have the necessary cash. Okay. They will pay these credit from their future earnings. So it therefore allows future transactions to be made in the present. Households and firms no longer need to postpone the expenditure until they have enough cash. They can do it now. Okay. In the same way, for households and firms who have surplus, they can deposit their these surplus in financial institutions that earn them another form of income, which is interest, that allows them to have a bigger disposable income in the future. So they can therefore transfer some of their current earnings into future expenditure. So when you put these together, what happens is that with financial institutions, they are able to make future transactions possible in the present. Okay? For households and firms that borrow, they can purchase now and pay using their future earnings. For those with surpluses, they can save now and with their interest earnings in the future add on to the disposable income that they can use in the future for their expenditures. By transferring future transactions to the present, financial institutions are therefore able to speed up the circular flow. Okay. Meanwhile, you have here government. Government collects taxes from all of the institutions here. Okay. Now, government uses the taxes in order to finance some of its more important expenditures. Okay? And they are the following. You have external defense. Government needs to provide a system for external defense to in order to encourage the circular flow to keep on going around and around. By having a system of external defense, government can reassure the economic system that it can deal with any external threat to the country. One does not need an actual invasion to cause the circular flow to slow down. A mere threat of invasion is enough to make the circular flow go down. What will happen is, like what's happening in the pandemic, if there's a threat of invasion, households will simply reduce their purchases to food and beverage, the basic necessities and possibly medicines, and you have a great slowing down of the economy like what one is experiencing right now with the pandemic. So therefore, if the government can assure the general public that it can deal with any external invasion. Even a threat can be dealt with so that the circular flow can continue to proceed and the economy keeps on growing and growing. That is how countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore have managed to keep on growing for the past 30 to 40 years because they have the armed force in order to reassure their local economies that they can deal with any possible external defense. And they were always under threat of possible invasion the past 40 to 50 years, with South Korea under threat from North Korea, Taiwan, from China, Singapore, from Malaysia, and Indonesia. So with that, their economies continued to grow because they had the assurance that the government has the system for external defense. Then the next is administration of justice. Conflict is normal in any society. Now, if one were to watch films such as television series such as Game of Thrones and the like, one notices that in case of any form of conflict, there would always be lots of people being killed. There'd be lots of fortresses being destroyed, being bombed, lots of explosions. So the effect here would be that a lot of people lose their lives and their properties. Now, in a modern economic system, conflict is dealt with through a system of through a system by which this conflict can be dealt with in an impartial and non-violent way. So you have the judicial system. It is the judicial system that can therefore adjudicate any conflict in society so that lives are therefore kept secure and property is also secure. Okay? With the administration of justice, therefore, it allows households, firms, financial institutions to continue with whatever it is that they're doing by way of their consumption and investment expenditure. And the circular flow keeps on moving and moving, knowing fully well that in case of conflict, lives and property can be preserved. Okay? And then another important responsibility of government is to provide for infrastructure. Infra is the Latin word for under or beneath. Infrastructure, therefore, are these particular facilities that are underneath the economic structure to make that structure function efficiently and smoothly. You have the transport system. The transport system would be the one that allows for the easy movement of goods and people. So this is the case where the circular flow is truly literal and physical. Goods and people are able to move around. And as the experience of the pandemic of 2020 will show to us, when the transport system is completely closed off and stopped, the circular flow completely slows down. Okay? So transport is a very, very important element in the smooth functioning of the circular flow. The communication system is the one that provides information, and it therefore makes transport decisions more efficient. With a communication system, one can therefore know whether it is time for somebody to go some other place in order to meet somebody, or if that particular meeting has been canceled. And one can also know if goods already need to be delivered at a certain period of time, or if goods will then be delivered, and therefore one can then decide to go to that particular place to obtain the goods. So the communication system makes the transport system more efficient. Energy allows for the economic activity to function on a 24-hour basis. Once we have electricity, then the entire economic system can function for 24 hours, which is why even in the Philippines, we have business process outsourcing establishments that deal with their clientele in North America and Europe, And when North America and Europe are open for business, that tends to be already nighttime here in Metro Manila, when the majority of the population should be taking the rest, should be taking their regular sleep. But this sector of the economy remains alive. They're able to deal with their clientele in North America and in Europe because they have a communications link, and there is an energy system which allows for these activities to proceed on a 24-hour basis. In this case, the circular flow is made to move even faster. In the absence of energy, the entire economic system, the entire circular flow would slow down during the dark hours. Okay? Now, if you go back to our structure there, you notice that there's the foreign sector. All the activities that happen in an economy can be dealt with the foreign sector for as long as there's a transport and communications link with the foreign sector. Households can therefore purchase goods and services which are produced abroad, and they could obtain their incomes by providing services to establishments which are abroad. Then you have firms which produce goods not necessarily for the local market, but they are for export. Okay? So the Philippines, for example, is a major producer and exporter of leather gloves, which are not necessarily in wide demand in a very tropical country like the Philippines. Firms can also obtain some of their inputs, such as their machinery and their equipment from abroad, and they even sometimes hire foreign individuals to come here and to work, or they pay foreign consultants and other professionals. Okay? In the same way, financial institutions in the Philippines do have deposits from foreign establishments and foreign individuals, and also provide them with credit, just as many households and firms in the Philippines have deposits abroad and have also obtained credit from outside. All these transactions can be done with the foreign sector for as long as there is an energy system that keeps the entire economy running 24 hours. And more importantly, you have the communication and transport link with countries outside. The only difference between the domestic transaction and the foreign transaction would be the need for foreign exchange, which is why if you think of the European Union, where you have about 17 to 19 countries deciding to have just one common currency, that has made the circular flow among these 19 countries even faster. Because although they are supposed to be transactions with a foreign country, effectively they're already like domestic transactions because one uses the same form of money. Now, the other important infrastructure is water and sanitation. Water is necessary because human beings need to have a supply of fresh, clean, potable, or drinkable water. And governments have to invest in the necessary water sources, both the sources of water plus in the in the installation of aqueducts and water pipes to distribute water to different parts of cities and towns and in the farms where water is very, very much needed. And governments do spend a lot in the construction of these water supply systems. But also, very importantly, they also need to provide for sanitation systems. Sanitation systems include the collection of garbage plus the treatment and processing of sewage and other organic garbage. Because this lack of sanitation facilities would be the main cause of a wide range of diseases which are very much communicable and therefore can create epidemics. Okay? A lot of diseases have disappeared because countries have invested in sanitation systems. Tuberculosis and cholera, for example, are caused by bacteria that thrive in sewage, in dirty water. And therefore, once sewage systems have been put in place and cleaning systems of these have been established, then tuberculosis and cholera are illnesses that have more or less disappeared in those countries that have the necessary sanitation system. Okay. With the sanitation system, it therefore reduces on the spread of illnesses. And when you have a large proportion of the population getting ill because of an epidemic, that slows down once more the circular flow because a lot of people start being ill, they're unable to work, they're unable to spend, and very many people in the society often would avoid each other and therefore slow down on some of their many usual expenditure activities, which is again exemplified in the epidemic, in the pandemic of 2020. And that's why a sanitation system is necessary in place in order to keep the circular flow moving and moving rapidly. An important infrastructure, therefore, in many countries is also to provide for housing for low-income households. Because when government is able to set up these housing units, therefore, would have their communication links, they have their telephone and telecommunications connection. They would have electric power lines, water pipes, and sewers, and the housing units can then be constructed in areas where there is a transport link, where the residents there can easily take public transit in order to go to places of work. So therefore, a very important infrastructure as well would be housing for the low income classes. And the last category of functions of government would be in the provision of social services, especially those social services that redistribute incomes in society. In this case, the redistribution of income does not involve a cash handout to the lower income classes. Rather, you have here that government tax revenues are then spent on these particular services, which would then be affordable to the lower income classes and therefore allows these lower income classes to therefore spend what they would have spent on these on other things. And therefore, they would have an improvement in their standard of living because they have greater disposable income. And these are government expenditures on education, on healthcare, housing, and on special sectors. When government spends on educational facilities, healthcare facilities, and housing for the lower income classes, then the recipients of these can now spend on other things what they would have spent on these things. So therefore, there is the realization of a higher material standard of living. And it's a form of a redistribution of income because these educational, health, and housing facilities were paid for by government taxes. And then you have services also for special sectors. And these are usually in the form of pensions for the elderly and pensions for people with disabilities. Because by providing these sectors with pensions, these sectors are then able to spend. Under normal circumstances, they would not be able to earn any factor income. But now, with pensions, they're able to spend, and it therefore adds to the circular flow of money, income, and product, and therefore allows the economy to attain a higher level of GNP and GNI. Okay? Now, when you therefore look at government taxation, its primary function is to finance the real expenditures of government. But it can also promote redistribution of income. When taxes from the higher income are used to finance education, healthcare, and housing for the lower income classes, then incomes are redistributed from the higher income earners to the lower income ones. Government can also use the tax system to promote merit wants, meaning to say those particular wants of households that they would like to encourage, and those which are regarded as not very, very encouraging, but the more efficient way of dealing with that is through the tax system. For example, government would think that education and healthcare are very, very important activities. So for those middle and higher income households, they could provide for a tax credit or a reduction in their tax for any expenditure they might have had on their healthcare and on their educational expenses. Now, government might think that the smoking of tobacco products and the indulgence in alcoholic beverages might be a not very, very encouraging habit. So rather than completely declaring these to be illegal, they instead would tax them. So there's a higher tax paid on the sale of tobacco products and on alcoholic beverages because these are seen as being demerit ones. Okay? So it is with the tax system that government can promote equity, but at the same time, tax systems ideally would also have to be efficient, meaning to say the actual revenue collected would be more than the cost of actually collecting those taxes. They'd be stable, meaning to say it's not changeable. And the tax system keeps on changing. It discourages people from paying their taxes. When there are changes, for example, in tax rates, and they're done, say, every presidential administration, taxpayers might want to wait until a next administration before they would pay their tax, thinking that it's going to change anyway. And finally, taxes have to be convenient. And that's the reason why the value-added tax is one of the major sources of revenue because it's a very, very convenient form of tax to pay. One pays it with every purchase that one makes. So the ideal tax system would fulfill these four, but no tax system is able to fulfill all of these four. So certain choices really have to be made. Income taxes, for example, are more equitable, yet they are more expensive to actually administer. In contrast, the value-added tax is very easy, very efficient for government, and yet it may not necessarily be equitable because the tax rate is the same, regardless of one's level of income. So now, here, therefore, would be just a summary of what the modern economic system is, okay, which is the structure of the economy of a developed country. So modernization is the process by which you have greater and greater specialization of economic functions, greater and greater monetization of transactions, and greater homogenization of goods and services. In a fully modern society, households are specialized in consumption and the supply of factors of production. Firms are specialized in the production of goods and services and the hiring and paying of factors of production. You're not expecting households producing goods for themselves. Okay? You don't expect households being able to construct their own houses or households being able to obtain all their food requirements from their backyards. Okay? That is not a modern household. Households that do have, say, some vegetable patch in their gardens are households where the bulk of their requirements they still purchase from the outside. But having a vegetable patch or herb garden means that they do it mainly at their leisure time. Now, transactions are also highly monetized. In order for goods and services to move more efficiently, one requires the exchange of money. It is an outcome of the specialization of economic functions. because now households have to obtain their goods and services from firms, and firms have to purchase their requirements for raw materials, for labor, for machinery and equipment. The most efficient way of doing this exchange is through the exchange of money. So you have greater and greater monetization of transactions. In fully modern societies, you even have transactions like surrogacy, which is the payment for a woman in order to conceive and carry the child of another couple. Okay? So here, even this is now monetized, and that is the nature of fully modern societies. And finally, since goods and services are being produced for a large society, and oftentimes it's not just your own country, but even for other parts of the world, there's a general homogenization of goods and services, meaning to say, goods and services became standardized in terms of their physical and other quality features. So you have a standardization, say, of clothing requirements, of furniture and the like, because these are being mass produced. The same with certain food items. Okay? Then even for skills, university graduates, therefore, wherever in the world are now expected to know how to deal with information technology and how to produce reports and the like using using word processing facilities and spreadsheet applications and the like, which requires knowledge both of computer technology and information technology. And that's homogenization throughout the world for all university graduates. There are some items which survive and thrive as highly specialized goods, but they deal with very, very specialized markets. Like, for example, what you call more luxury goods and more local type food items, such as certain types of cheeses and certain types of meat products, peculiar to certain places in Europe, for example. But the general trend is that these have to cater for particular markets. For those that cater for wider markets, they are generally more and more homogenized because they're being mass produced. But more than that, for easy recognition by consumers. So these are the main characteristics of a fully modern economic society, of a fully developed economic system, that they have a high degree of specialization of economic functions, a high degree of monetization of transactions, and a high degree of homogenization of goods and services. Now, what is a developing economy? A developing economy has a sector that is fully modern, just like what we have here. You have a fully modern economic system in developing countries. And in fact, the fully modern economic system of all countries in the world are closely integrated with each other. They have their communication and transport links with each other, so that the modern sector in the Philippines can easily connect with those in the United States, in Canada, and Hong Kong, in Europe, and the like. Okay? But there is a sector in the developing economy which is not integrated into the modern sector, and these should be called the informal sector. Okay? What's the informal sector? One has to understand the origins of fully developed economic systems. Fully developed economic systems are fully modern, which meant that previously they all started out as being traditional societies, like the societies pictured in Game of Thrones or in The Lord of the Rings and the like. In these societies, you have a low degree of specialization of economic functions. So households produce their own food. they make their own clothes, and they even construct their own houses. So there are not very many firms. And because most households are able to provide for their own requirements, there is a very, very low degree of monetization of transactions. There is not much need for money to obtain the requirements of households. And needless to say, the requirements of households are very, very minimal. They don't have a lot of the more sophisticated gadgetry that we know of. And finally, if ever some goods are being produced and sold, they're being produced and sold for a very, very small market. So therefore, there is no homogenization or standardization of goods and services. They vary from community to community. Like here in the Philippines, traditionally, many towns in Laguna, Bulacan, and the like have their own kind of puto. These puto have their own shape, sizes, and colors that vary from town to town. And these are your traditional types of puto because they emerged during the time when they were selling only to the local community. Once the photo is being produced on a larger scale, then it becomes homogenized. It gets to be a certain size, a certain color, a certain shape, but the basic ingredient remains the same, which is rice flour. So these traditional societies, where the societies where the developed economies came from, they're now fully modern societies. But a developing economy is one where it already has a modern sector, but it has a sector that is no longer traditional, right? No longer with a very, very low degree of specialization, monetization, or homogenization. But they're not yet fully integrated with the modern sector. Okay? And here's an example. You have on the upper part here, you have a case of an informal housing development somewhere in Peru, and below that, a fully modern housing establishment over in Singapore. The housing units in the upper picture were largely constructed by the local people using materials that they themselves could obtain. And if you will notice, there is no clear pattern, no clear arrangement, and one is not very, very certain how they're able to obtain electricity, water, and if they have any communication facilities, and how they deal with their sanitation systems. In contrast, when you have a mass housing development in the lower picture, which you can see there in Singapore, these units all are located where they have easy transport access. Each of these units do have their electrical power lines, their communication lines, their water lines, and their sewer lines. And they are all arranged in a very logical form. They would have their corridors, they would have their common facilities, which means it would be very easy for them to deal with an emergency in case they need to evacuate. But when you have an informal sector, what will happen is that they are in close proximity to each other. And the informal sector is not integrated with the rest of the economy. And those in the informal sector tend to be those with very, very low levels of income. And they might not have ready access to any of the jobs and any of the opportunities available in the modern sector. Which is why when one is thinking of the process of economic development, one is talking about integrating the informal sector with the modern sector. And this is, among other things, made possible through the provision of infrastructure. This is a stylized diagram which shows how space, even in modern societies, is specialized. You do have underground features which allow for transport systems to be located there. And here, you would have also water pipes and communication lines also placed underground, which then connects to the different places in the city. And if there is some form of government housing, then these housing units for the lower income households would mean that they have the infrastructure link, the transport link, communication link, water supply, sanitation systems, and the energy requirements so that these lower income households are able to integrate themselves into the modern sector. And over time, what where lower income households would become middle income households. And so this is, from this particular theory, the process by which a country moves from being a developing country to become a developed country. And there's a very, very important role of infrastructure development here in order to make the circular flow move very fast. And then, as an illustration here, that's one of the reasons why in the European Union, okay, the transport system and the environmental system are all concerns of the European Union and not just of the individual member countries because of their realization that when the transport system is put in place and when the environmental system is put in place, which means that there's the water supply and sanitation systems that have to be present in order to maintain the integrity of the natural environment. These things, these items are the infrastructure that would integrate more and more of the lower income communities in the European Union and allow them to be more integrated into the modern sector and therefore allow for the circular flow to move faster and faster. So here we are, therefore, in our discussion of the structure of the economic system. Important, therefore, to keep in mind is that this is the structure of a fully modern or a fully organized or a developed economy that allows for a very, very rapid circular flow of money, income, and product. And among the items that make the circular flow move rapidly would be government infrastructure programs, the availability of external defense and the administration of justice and the provision for social services, which allow for the attainment of greater specialization of economic functions, monetization of transactions, and the homogenization of goods and services. And for developing economies, they're a dualistic economy in that they have a modern sector and the informal sector coexisting in the same country. And therefore, for long-term economic development, the informal sector would need to be integrated with the modern sector, which means that infrastructure development has to be so designed so that the lower income communities could have the necessary access to transport, communication, energy, water supply, and sanitation systems. And often this is made possible through the expenditure by government in housing facilities and housing developments for the lower income households, where many of these residential developments for the lower income would also have the necessary educational facilities, healthcare, and social services facilities. So this is the structural theory of economic development. And it's based upon an analysis of the history of the developed countries. So I'll end here.